You won't believe what Chinese public opinion just exposed about the shocking truth of the 1979 border war. Welcome back to the Memory Lane channel. Dear viewers, China is famous for its strict media censorship, arguably second only to North Korea. Because of that, public thinking and viewpoints on sensitive historical events are steered and controlled by the state, especially regarding the 1979 border war with Vietnam. In that war, Beijing declared a resounding victory, and for a long time Chinese media repeated the same line. Yet only recently, for reasons unclear, some Chinese outlets suddenly ran explosive pieces revealing confidentials the Chinese government had tried to hide for decades. The revelations reportedly left officials and cadres under Xi Jinping fuming. According to one such article, in September 1978, at the office of the PLA chief of the General Staff, a meeting was held on intelligence suggesting Vietnam would attack Cambodia. Most attendees argued that a major shock strike against Hanoi was needed for the Southeast Asian situation. They proposed hitting a regular Vietnamese unit over a broad area. The meeting ended with no decision. In November 1978, Deng Xiaoping toured Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore. On the trip, he told leaders that China would use force if Vietnam attacked Cambodia. On December 7, 1978, China's Central Military Commission decided to open a limited war on the Vietnam-China border. The war will be confined to 50 kilometers from the border and last 2 weeks. On December 8, 1978, the CMC ordered the Guangzhou and Kunming military regions to fully prepare forces before January 10, 1979, to launch the attack on Vietnam. Beijing's war declaration said this was a counterattack against Vietnamese provocations. A Xinhua spokesperson stated, Chinese border forces acted when the situation became unacceptable and there was no alternative. We do not want an inch of Vietnam's land. We want a stable, peaceful border. After striking the aggressive forces efficiently, our border troops will return to firmly guard the motherland's border. Many Western historians judge the war's goals as unclear. The most obvious was to punish Vietnam for toppling the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, China's ally in one of the 20th century's most brutal regimes. Later speculation held that the war fit Deng Xiaoping's military modernization plan by exposing PLA's shortcomings. Others argued Deng started the war to keep the military busy while he consolidated power and eliminated Mao-era leftist rivals. Dr. Min Zhong from a U.S. college, Call, contends Deng attacked Vietnam primarily in response to the Soviet threat to China. Hanoi's alliance with Moscow made Deng believe the threat came from both North and South. Chinese leaders thought punishing Vietnam would strike at the USSR's global expansion strategy. In retrospect, China may have overreacted to the Soviet threat, but at the time Deng truly believed it. Other factors also pushed the decision. Domestic politics and relations with the U.S.-Vietnam misconduct, especially the alliance with the USSR, infuriated Beijing. China wanted to punish a treacherous ally after years of aiding Vietnam against the U.S. border clashes further inflamed Chinese public sentiment, building consensus among political and military elites to back Deng's war. Deng believed aligning with the West would show China's value in containing Soviet expansion, and in return the West would help China reform its economy. Power struggles inside the party, plus factionalism in the military, made Beijing even more willing to act. In Deng's view, a limited war would rally domestic and foreign support and create a safer environment for China's modernization. According to Cartier, in China's eyes, Hanoi was ungrateful to Beijing. After receiving Chinese support against the U.S., Vietnam mistreated its ethnic Chinese community. It warmed ties with the USSR, China's sworn enemy, and then attacked Beijing's ally, the Khmer Rouge. China wanted to teach Vietnam a lesson for challenging its authority and influence in Indochina. Alongside invading Vietnam to stabilize the border after years of rising clashes, China needed to prove it could protect the Khmer Rouge. From Vietnam's perspective, the conflict was part of China's southward expansion. Prior to open hostilities, Vietnam had anticipated Chinese moves into Indochina, including the South China Sea. China armed Cambodia and built infrastructure while egging on Khmer Rouge raids into Vietnam, planning to use Cambodia as a springboard while coordinating with PLA forces in the north to encircle Vietnam and, if needed, attacked to force Hanoi's submission. Vietnamese analysis held China's military goals were quickly seize the Vietnam-China border belt, especially key towns, Lạng Sơn, blocking Vietnam's national Route 1 to China, Chao Bang and Lao Cai, hold a zone several dozen kilometers deep as a springboard for deeper thrusts, attrite Vietnam's main forces and weaken defense by wiping out border posts, destroying local forces and independent units, and devastate infrastructure and economy in occupied areas to push Vietnam toward collapse. Deng Xiaoping insisted that despite military setbacks, China achieved political and operational victory. He even claimed the PLA could have marched on Hanoi if it wanted. A less popular view, by Chun Yun, vice premier and one of the PRC's 5 elders, with Mao Zedong, Liu Shaoqi, Zhou Enlai, and Zhu De, argued that taking Hanoi served no purpose. A prolonged war would be too costly. For financial reasons, China should not repeat a war without a decisive outcome. In an April 16, 1979 internal military political conference, 1 month after withdrawal, Deng harshly criticized officials and commanders for campaign errors. Despite superior weapons and numbers, the PLA's casualties were 4 times Vietnam's. At Chao Bang, fights were often 5-1, 6-1 in China's favor. At Lạng Sơn and Lao Cai, 6-1, 7-1. Yet losses were staggering. Our myth has been shattered, Deng said, referring to PLA's aura of dominance. General Zhang Jun, head of the General Logistics Department, recalled the worst problem in pre-war prep was shortages and poor quality ammunition. Initial checks found many duds, with 1/3 of mortar rounds failing. During the war, China consumed about 700 tons /day of ammunition and fuel. In total, China used 1.06 million shells, 23,800 tons of ammunition, and 55 million small arms rounds, and plenty of technical gear, but lacked enough maintenance engineers. With too few trucks and bad roads, China mobilized hundreds of thousands of porters, yet still couldn't move supplies fast enough. Overloaded logistics blunted combat effectiveness of troops and weapons. Henry Kissinger judged that ideology had vanished from the conflict. The communist world's power centers waged war not on ideological lines, but on national interests. Author King Seen estimates the PLA achieved 50 to 55% of its limited objectives. While China roughly followed its advance and withdrawal plans, it failed to meet stated goals. It did not destroy any Vietnamese divisions, did not end border clashes, did not force Vietnam out of Cambodia, and did not sway Hanoi on the ethnic Chinese issue. Weaknesses included obsolete weapons, underestimating Vietnam's military, poor combat experience, and low morale. In late December 1978, Chinese Vice Defense Minister Su Xiu reportedly told the CCP's 3rd session that only parts of the Guangzhou and Kunming military regions would be enough to take Hanoi in a week. In reality, China needed 16 days and 10 corps from 6 military regions, equivalent to the entire Guangzhou and Kunming regions, just to capture Lạng Sơn, a town only 15 kilometers from the border and still 135 kilometers from Hanoi. China advanced on average 0.9 kilometers per day, taking 16 days to cover just 1/10 of the distance to Hanoi. At Lạng Sơn, 2 Chinese armies were held up for a week by a single Vietnamese regiment. Another army needed 10 days to take Lao Cai and Cam Duong. At Chao Bang, progress was so hard that at least 2 armies were needed to keep pushing. In Quang Ninh, a Vietnamese platoon held up a Chinese regiment for 5 hours on the march to Chao Ba Lan Ridge, inflicting 360 casualties out of 2,800. Similar losses repeated across the front, yielding little result. The PLA failed to employ mass manpower with combined arms tactics, preventing the rapid, decisive tempo it sought, resorting instead to outdated human wave approaches reminiscent of Korea in the 1950s. The tactical failures forced the CMC to accelerate PLA modernization. After 35 days, China called off what it labeled as self-defensive counterattack to Vietnamese provocations and to aid Cambodian resistance. Increasingly, Chinese voices, especially scholars and veterans, now recognize it was a meaningless war born of leadership mistakes. Under the banner self-defensive counterattack against Vietnam, a controversial war indeed, the site Tennessee published an article by Shihu Jianke, Westlake swordsman, who claimed to be a veteran of the February 17th campaign. The self-defensive counterattack against Vietnam had serious problems in planning and command. We must reassess it. Casualties were too high. Our army failed to show superiority in equipment and tactics. Logistics and supply were chaotic. There was no combined arms between infantry, tanks, ground, and air. Air Force and strategic missiles did not participate. Light weapons were too old, and we couldn't achieve fire suppression. Field officers barely knew how to fight combined arms. The top command was confused. The war did not achieve punitive aims against Vietnam, nor destroy their capacity and resources, nor cripple their main forces. Politically, it did not achieve the goal of making Vietnam pay, or installing a more pro-China government. However, the key domestic political objective, resolving who controls the military, was achieved. He listed 11 issues needing clarity. Among the most important, one that causes a war were never publicly, convincingly explained. Even Zhang Sham, Operations Department Director and son of former Defense Minister Zhang Xiaoping, admitted in his books Out of the War and The Last Special Forces that even the defense minister didn't really know why China had to fight. 2. Core strategic objectives were not achieved. 3. Advanced equipment sat idle. China had modern aircraft, tanks, missiles, but commanders didn't know combined arms, turning assets into dead weight. One aircraft could have solved a blockade, he wrote, but we used whole corps against the basic logic of war. For the coherent battle plan, at the outset, troops poured in en masse. From Hill 796, all I could see was our own infantry everywhere, he recalled. One enemy shell could wipe out a whole swath. Even a child in the village could have commanded better. 5. Self-inflicted wounds. To avoid the fighting after crossing into another country, some soldiers shot themselves in the foot. 6. Pathetic benefits for wounded. I got 15 yuan, like in the anti-Japanese war days. In 2010, 31 years later, I received 300 yuan in disability back pay, about 10 yuan a year. Death benefits for Kia equal the value of one pig, 300 yuan. An article on TIAs.net titled A Meaningless, Bizarre War by another veteran said, in Korea we gained leverage, checking U.S. forces south of the 38th parallel. In the Civil War we liberated the mainland. But in the bizarre 1979 war, what on earth did China gain? Nothing. On Botan.com, author Truong Tan wrote under Revisiting the Self-Defensive Counterattack Against Vietnam. It may be the hardest war for informed Chinese to talk about since 1949. Even then, many people disagreed with the government's valuation. At first, seeing endless lines of 18 to 20-year-olds heading to front, people were stirred. Soon after, they saw thousands of graves in the southwest border cemeteries. Unspeakable grief. Stranger still, when the war ended, no one knew. There was no national victory celebration, just silence. It ended, and that was that. Hard to explain to the public the true nature of the war. Frankly, the so-called self-defensive counterattack was in fact a relief operation for the Khmer Rouge under heavy Vietnamese attack. The war's nature was set by the Khmer Rouge, students of China's Cultural Revolution doctrine, and even more extreme, their terror reached the pinnacle of human cruelty. Conservative estimates say 1.2 to 3 million Cambodians died under their rule, about 1/4 of the population, including 215,000 ethnic Chinese Cambodians and nearly all the 20,000 ethnic Vietnamese Cambodians. On December 15, 1978, at the call of the Kampuchean United Front for National Salvation, Vietnamese volunteers launched an offensive against the Khmer Rouge, partly, Vietnam said, to save its nationals. Chinese authors rarely mention the Khmer Rouge's brutal border war against Vietnam from 1975 onward. Cambodians did not resist. Many even guided Vietnamese troops. In just 2 weeks, on January 7, 1979, Vietnamese forces captured Phnom Penh, toppling the regime, showing clearly the Khmer Rouge lacked popular support. The enthusiasm at later anniversaries of liberation, particularly large events in Phnom Penh, where leaders thanked Vietnam for ending the darkest chapter in Cambodian history, underscores the objective reality behind what Chinese narratives call a Vietnamese invasion. Cambodian gratitude raises serious doubts about the justice of China's self-defensive counterattack. To wage the February 17, 1979 war, China prepared meticulously, mobilizing massive forces. Elite shock units considered the PLA's best. Official accounts say the CMC decided on December 7, 1978, issuing orders December 8th. According to People's Daily, the Guangxi Front under Su Xiu included the 41st, 42nd, 43rd, 54th, 55th Corps, and the 149th Division. The Yunnan Front under Yang Diji included the 11th, 13th, 14th Corps, and the 149th Division, plus the 50th Corps, Border Guards, and militia, over 500,000 troops, with 202,000 crossing the border, though China counted the war as 1 month. February 17 to March 16, 1979. It burned through 1.06 million shells, 23,800 tons of ammunition, 55 million rifle rounds, 268 military trucks, 48 tanks destroyed or damaged, 8,531 Kia, 23,000 plus wounded, 238 POWs. On average, 1 regiment a day was rendered combat ineffective. Heavy, unexpected losses were a key reason China ended the war early. In the first 2 days, over 4,000 Chinese soldiers fell. Medical units were overwhelmed. Many died of blood loss without timely care. Newly released internal Chinese documents show that once combat bogged down, casualty rates for assault companies often hit 90%. Units withdrawn sometimes had only a dozen survivors, with squads down to 1 to 2 men. All this suggests that despite official proclamations of victory, Chinese media's own later exposés laid bare the PLA's weaknesses and failures. Beijing's ambition to crush Vietnam ended with a humiliating withdrawal. And that's where we'll wrap today's video. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the newest uploads from Memory Lane. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.